Hi, and welcome to the second part of our video lecture for Module 3-B on Philippine Clean Water Act. In this video, we are going to discuss the sources and regulations under the Philippine Clean Water Act. Let's start with sources. Now, under the law, there are two kinds of sources. We have a point source and a non-point source. All right, what are these? Okay, point source means any identifiable source of pollution with specific point of discharge. And note that the specific point of discharge is a particular water body. All right, while a non-point source is is a source which is not identifiable, no, uh, which includes but is not limited to runoff from irrigation, rainwater, which picks up pollutants from farms and urban areas. All right. Now, pretty straightforward. It just means that in trying to identify the category of a source, the kind of source, you just have to see whether number one, the source is it identifiable. Okay. Number two, the point of discharge is it identifiable. Number three, is the point of discharge a water body? Now, if all these, if the answer to all these questions uh, is yes, then that source is a point source. However, when at the outset you ask, is the source identifiable? And if the answer is no, then already you can say that it's non-point source. All right. Note that the law gives examples, but it's not an exclusive list of the examples. No, it just says it just says include, but it's not limited to these examples. All right. Now to try to compare the two, no, the point source and non-point source. All right, we can see here that point source, because the source is identifiable, because the point of discharge is also specific and identifiable. um, Point sources are directly subject to effluent standards. All right. While non-point sources, uh, because these are not identifiable now as point source, they are, yes, still they are in subject to the provisions of the Clean Water Act, but these are identified and addressed by specialized government agencies using the linkage mechanism, wherein the law uh, states that the DNR should coordinate with other government agencies with specialized knowledge on these matters. For example, runoff from irrigation, because it's irrigation matter, then it falls under the domain, the expertise of the Department of Agriculture, right? And so those are the sources of water pollution under the Philippine Clean Water Act. Now we go to the discussion on regulations that are applicable to uh, to sources identified. Note that under the Philippine Clean Water Act, both sources are subject to regulations, but for purposes of our discussion moving forward, we'll just try to discuss regulations uh, that are applicable specifically to point sources. All right, non-point sources, there may be, because there are varieties of non-point sources, and um, a a group perhaps of non-point sources is addressed perhaps by one government agency, and there are specialized regulations. So for lack of material time, let's focus on regulations that are applicable primarily to uh, point sources. All right. Now the regulations applicable to point sources, no, primarily would be categorized into two aspects. Okay. we have area-based regulations, and we have discharge-based regulations. Okay, let's start our discussion on area-based regulations. Okay, area-based regulations, just like the area-based regulations under the Philippine Clean Air Act, these are the kinds or the aspects of regulations which which have for its primary mechanism the area or a specific designated area, the designation of an area over which some additional layers of governance are applicable. All right, and area-based regulations, we have here management areas. Okay, now management areas or water quality management areas, they are an equivalent of airsheds under the Philippine Clean Air Act. All right. Now, why is this an equivalent? Now, why is a water quality management area an equivalent mechanism? Because water quality management areas are those areas with similar hydrogeological, meteorological, geographic conditions, etc. Um, and these areas, because they have similar characteristics, because they have similar conditions, they are clustered as one for more efficient uh, governance, more efficient management of water quality, because the similarity of the conditions would affect the reactions of bacteria, of biological properties, and even the diffusion of the pollutants in the water bodies. All right, and because they have such similar conditions, they share common interest, or they share similar development programs, prospects, or problems. As such, because they share these common conditions, these common interests, no, similar problems, they might as well be uh, clustered into groups, no, into areas, and such that each area would now have a relatively specialized governance. No, it's an additional layer of governance, but note again, just like airsheds, uh, the governance, additional layer of governance, would only pertain insofar as the metes and bounds of the designated area are concerned. No? Note that water quality management areas may come in the form of a watershed, of a river basin, or a water resource region. All right. Now, the effect of the declaration of the management area, it has the same effect. No, that's why it's considered as a parallel to the mechanism of an airshed, because the same effect, no, by the declaration of a management area, a governing board will be created, and the governing board, because it has the power to govern these areas, they have the power to issue rules, issue resolutions or regulations, which shall take effect in the management area, but not beyond. All right. Okay, just a an illustration of the areas where we have water quality management area. Notably, here we have one in Cebu. We have Butuanon River watershed in region 7. All right. Okay. Now, aside from water quality management areas, there's also another kind of area-based regulation, which is also like the it is also a parallel uh, mechanism, no, with the Philippine Clean Air Act. There's also a non-attainment area in the Philippine Clean Air Act, all right, and here as well in the Philippine Clean Water Act, all right. Non-attainment area, and because this is somehow parallel to the notion, to the idea of a non-attainment area in the Philippine Clean Air Act, okay, the same would be said, no, that these are areas which are designated as such because specific pollutants have already exceeded the threshold, have already exceeded the guidelines, and because these areas have already because in these areas specific pollutants have already exceeded, no, the allowable threshold, then they are to be designated as non-attainment areas, you know, for the exceeded pollutants. Now, the effect would be that the department will also prepare and implement a program just like the non-attainment area in the Philippine Clean Air Act. It will prohibit new sources uh, of the exceeded water pollutant without the corresponding reduction in discharges from existing sources. All right, that means that yes, the existing sources may still operate, but as a default, new sources will now not be allowed except when there is a corresponding reduction in the discharges of the said pollutant. All right. Here, it's just, but this one is a somehow a nuance between the non-attainment area for I mean the non-attainment area for Philippine Clean Water Act, because according to the law, if the pollutant is naturally occurring, discharge of the pollutant may be allowed provided that the effluent concentration of the discharge shall not exceed the naturally occurring level of the pollutant in the area. All right. Okay, and provided finally that the effluent concentration and volume of discharge shall not adversely affect water supply, public health, and ecological protection. Okay, this provision or this proviso is not found under the Philippine Clean Air Act. Okay, now if we try to compare, you know, the essential aspects of the non-attainment area under the Philippine Clean Air Act and under the Philippine Clean Water Act, we see here that the basis would be the same, no? Somehow the same. The pollutants allowable in the area have been exceeded, no? The pollutants allowable in the area have been exceeded. But the effect, the effect as well would be on the existing sources uh, would be the same. Okay, here no new sources default as a rule unless there's a decrease in the existing sources. But here, according to the law, according to the Philippine Clean Water Act, no new sources are allowed unless there's a decrease in the discharge of existing sources. Note that while they are the default is similar to both laws, we can observe here that the effect for to new sources here is that no new sources are allowed unless there's a decrease in existing sources. All right, but under the Philippine Clean Water Act, no new sources would not be allowed unless there's a decrease, not necessarily of existing sources, but the decrease in the discharge of existing sources. So now we have to distinguish the effect to new sources, all right, between the Philippine Clean Air Act non-attainment area and Philippine Clean Water Act non-attainment area. Now, as to there's now a difference, a stark difference, okay, between the non-attainment area under the Philippine Clean Air Act and Philippine Clean Water Act, because under the Philippine Clean Air Act, existing sources, while they are permitted to continue to operate in those areas, they are subject to surcharges. All right. Now, surcharges may mean without violation or with violation, such that under the implementing rules and regulations, once an existing source continues to operate in the non-attainment area, it's subject to 50% surcharge. All right. But when that source is violating a provision of the Philippine Clean Air Act, then the surcharge applicable to the penalty imposed would be 100% surcharge. Now, we contrast that to the effect of a non-attainment area to existing sources under the Philippine Clean Water Act. All right. Now, the Philippine Clean Water Act uh, and its IRR do not impose surcharges. Okay, in fact, according to the rules, existing sources, they while they are allowed to continuously operate in the non-attainment area, they are subject to stricter monitoring. Okay, and maximum penalties, however, would be imposed when there are violations. Note that there's no mention about surcharges here. There's no mention about 100 or 50% surcharges, such that even if you are an existing source under in a non-attainment area under the Philippine Clean Water Act, there's no surcharge applicable whatsoever insofar as your discharge is concerned. Okay, but when that source violates the law, violates the provisions of the Philippine Clean Water Act, then whatever penalties applicable would have to be implemented, would have to be imposed at the maximum. Okay? At the maximum. Right. Now, let's go to another aspect of regulation under the Philippine Clean Water Act, which is discharge-based regulations. Those are the area-based regulations, meaning the basis for the regulations would be the designated area, designated water quality management area, non-attainment area. But now we go to discharge-based regulations. Plainly speaking, the basis of the regulations would be the discharge of a specific source, point source. All right, let's go to discharge-based regulations, and the first of them would be the effluent standard system. Note that there is an alignment of the definition of effluent and point sources. Now, effluent is a wastewater that flows out of a known source, and that the point of discharge is known, even and the point of discharge is a water body. While a point source is a source identifiable, and the point of discharge is also specific, and that specific point of discharge is a body of water. Now, because of this alignment, all right, because of this alignment, we can say that effluent standard system applies to point sources, because point sources are the producers of effluent. No? Okay, now effluent standard, okay, that's defined as the legal restriction or limitation on quantities, on rates and concentrations of any combination thereof of effluent, okay, which a person or a point source, okay, a person or a point source is allowed to discharge into a body of water or land which has, of course, access to a water body. All right. Now, this is what we call as the threshold, no, for purposes of discussion, because the effluent standard would be the ceiling, no, would be the point which cannot be crossed by a specific source, who is merely allowed to produce yes, to produce effluent, meaning to pollute to some extent the water body, or a specific water body. And so, because that's the point which should not be crossed, the point source, or the person in charge of a point source should not exceed the threshold. Otherwise, there are consequences, as we shall discuss later on. Right? Now, how is the threshold used? How is the standard used under the Philippine Clean Water Act? All right. Now, standards are found, unlike the Clean Air Act, where you can see the standards or the guidelines. The standards under the Clean Water Act are purely administrative. No, the determination of the standards, it was delegated all throughout by Congress to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And so we don't have statutory standards here. We don't have statutory thresholds here. Um, um, Standards, the thresholds are found in administrative issuances and of course in the permits. All right. And how does this work? All right. Here is the delegation, okay, by Congress stating that uh, department should prepare the standards and the category effluent standards within a specific period of time, even to revise every 2 years based on available scientific evidence and studies. All right. Now, if we try to compare Philippine Clean Air Act standards, Philippine Clean Water Act standards, here because there are values that are uh, included in the law, in the Philippine Clean Air Act, we can see here that there's statutory threshold, and then of course there's governing board threshold if applicable, and then we have permits, the permit threshold. However, under the Philippine Clean Water Act, because there are no values that are incorporated in the law, and specifically because the determination of the values of the standards, it was delegated to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. The first layer would be administrative thresholds, then we have governing thresholds when applicable, and then permits for effluent and wastewater, right? And speaking of permits, we have as well as discharge-based regulation, no, discharge permits. According to the law, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources will have to require owners or operators of facilities which discharge regulated effluents pursuant to the act, which are permitted to discharge effluents which are regulated, to secure a permit to discharge. Without a permit to discharge, therefore, you are not allowed to discharge effluents, to discharge regulated effluents into bodies of water. Okay, you're not allowed, in short, to pollute the water. All right, the water body. The discharge permit is the legal authorization, okay, to discharge wastewater, to discharge effluent. All right, provided that the discharge shall specify the quantity, the quality of the effluent, and then that are allowed to discharge into a particular water body. It will also identify the compliance schedule and the monitoring requirement. These are applicable to an owner or operator which is allowed to discharge mga regulated effluents because they need to secure a permit to discharge. All right, and last of the three discharge-based regulations would be the wastewater charge system. Here we can see that here we have the application of the polluter pays principle. How is that? Here the department was charged to implement a wastewater charge system in the management areas. All right, and that the system will have to be on the basis of payment to the government for discharging wastewater into water bodies. The fee will have to be based on the quantity of wastewater, and that is determined using the wastewater charge formula to be established by the DENR. Right? Okay. Now, question regarding while the area-based regulations and the discharge-based regulations are efficient, all right, in regulating the amount of water pollution, it's undeniable that there may be violators. It's undeniable that there will be sources of water pollution which will not follow the permits, the governing board, and the even the administrative standards. And so there will be a possibility that a specific water body, okay, will still be polluted, no, will still be considered as polluted. And of course the law, those kinds of regulations are somehow preventive. Now what if there is, as a fact already, there is a water body that becomes polluted, notwithstanding all the regulations that have been placed under the law? What would be the remedy? What would be the protection or safeguard by the provided by the law? All right. This topic we will discuss in the next video, specifically the cleanup operations under the Philippine Clean Water Act. See you in the next video.